All right, let's jump right in, shall we? Today, we're diving headfirst into the whirlwind of Australian federal politics.
Buckle up.
We've got a mountain of news articles, some spicy political analysis pieces, and even a few economic reports, all hot off the press.
Covering everything from February 16th to, well, right now.
It's a lot to unpack, but we're here to help you navigate the chaos, or at least the political kind. Think of this as your express ticket to understanding what's what in Aussie politics without getting bogged down in the nitty-gritty.
Cutting through the noise, that's what we're here for.
And the biggest question on everyone's mind, of course, is will Albanese and the Labour government manage to snag another term?
The million-dollar question.
The polls are painting a pretty tight race, even hinting at a possible hung parliament. Talk about a cliffhanger. What are your thoughts on these predictions?
Well, the polls are certainly interesting, to say the least. A hung parliament is definitely on the cards, and that would shake things up quite a bit.
So, no clear winner, basically.
Essentially, yeah, neither Labour nor the coalition would secure enough seats to form a majority government.
Okay, now I know we've got some political junkies listening in, but for those of us who don't spend all day dissecting polls, break it down for us. What exactly does a hung parliament mean for everyday Australians? Like, should we be stocking up on canned goods?
Haha, no need for the apocalypse preps just yet. But a hung parliament does throw a wrench in the traditional two-party system.
How so?
It forces parties to negotiate and compromise. We could end up with a minority government, where the party with the most seats has to rely on support from independents or smaller parties to get things done.
So, potential for some unexpected alliances.
Oh, absolutely. We might see a power shift, with independent MPs wielding more influence than usual. It's like a political game of musical chairs. Everyone's scrambling for a seat at the table.
And all this while Albanese's approval rating is taking a nosedive.
Yeah, Reuters has it down to a net negative 21. Ouch.
And a recent news poll showed that more than half of voters don't think the government deserves another go.
Not exactly a vote of confidence.
You'd think those numbers would have the government frozen in place, but they seem to be forging ahead with new policies and initiatives.
It's a bit like they're trying to make up for lost time. Or maybe they're hoping these last-minute moves will sway some voters.
A little bit of political maneuvering, perhaps. So let's delve into some of these initiatives. The government has just rolled out a brand new national anti-bullying strategy with a big emphasis on schools. What's the gist of this strategy?
Well, it's not just about setting rules. It's about making sure those rules are actually effective.
And actually followed, I'd imagine.
Exactly. It's about creating a consistent, evidence-based approach to tackling bullying right across the country. They're doing this big review of existing procedures in schools to figure out what works best and create a national standard.
So a more unified approach. Makes sense.
The goal is to create a safer environment for students, both online and offline, and give teachers the tools they need to deal with bullying effectively.
It's a big issue, especially with cyberbullying on the rise.
And all the mental health issues that come with it. Parents are definitely keeping a close eye on this one.
I bet they are. Now, switching gears a bit, the government's also making some moves in the justice system. They're setting up a new administrative review tribunal registry in Darwin. This seems like a pretty significant development for people in the Northern Territory. What's the big deal?
Well, the Administrative Review Tribunal, or ART for short, deals with a whole range of government decisions. Think welfare, veterans benefits, NDIS funding.
Big stuff.
And until now, people in the Northern Territory would have to travel thousands of kilometers to have their cases heard.
Not exactly convenient.
This new registry in Darwin changes all that. It makes the whole process so much more accessible.
So it's about fairness and equal access to justice regardless of where you live.
Exactly. And it's especially important for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in remote communities.
I can see how this would be a game changer for them. So the government's trying to address some major issues here, but let's be honest, there's one topic that always looms large in an election year: the economy.
The elephant in the room, as they say.
Right, and it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride lately, hasn't it? Inflation has been hitting everyone hard.
Oh, tell me about it.
But there are signs it might be cooling down, right?
Yeah, core inflation is easing, which is good news, getting closer to that target range the Reserve Bank is always talking about.
So a glimmer of hope. But of course, to fight that inflation, we've had some pretty hefty interest rate hikes.
Which has been a real pain for anyone with a mortgage.
Especially those who jumped into the market when rates were super low.
Talk about bad timing. But there's chatter about a possible rate cut on the horizon, isn't there?
That's the rumor. First one since 2020, if it happens.
It's a tricky situation for the Reserve Bank, though. They need to stimulate the economy without sending inflation skyrocketing again.
Like walking a tightrope. And what about jobs? Is the job market holding steady, or are the cracks starting to show?
The job market has been pretty strong so far, surprisingly. Unemployment's around 4%.
That's not bad.
But there's a sense that things might be slowing down. Some economists are predicting a bit of a slump in job growth.
So some good news, some not so good news. It's a mixed bag, really. But with all these economic pressures, the inflation, the interest rates, the potential job market wobbles, how do you think this will play out in the lead up to the election? What are the big economic worries that are keeping voters up at night?
I think it's safe to say that the cost of living is top of mind for most Australians right now. Even though inflation is easing, the impact of those price hikes is still hitting people hard.
It's those everyday expenses, right? Groceries, energy bills, rent.
Exactly. Voters are looking for solutions, not just empty promises. They want to know that whoever's in charge is going to take their financial well-being seriously.
And that brings us to Peter Dutton and the opposition coalition. They're not missing a beat in trying to capitalize on these anxieties, are they?
Nope, they know this is their chance to make headway. Dutton's been hammering the government on their economic record, saying Australians are struggling under Labor's leadership.
And he's even gone so far as to threaten to break up big insurance companies if the coalition wins.
That was a bold move, accusing them of ripping off customers and basically positioning himself as the defender of everyday Aussies who were battling those rising insurance premiums.
It certainly got everyone's attention, but is it actually feasible? I mean, could that really happen, and what would the impact be?
It's a big claim, for sure. Whether it's actually doable is another question altogether. We'd likely see some legal challenges, and who knows what the ripple effects would be in the insurance market. It's not like there's a clear-cut roadmap for this kind of thing.
So a lot of uncertainty, potentially, but it shows how much those rising costs are getting under people's skin. Of course, the coalition's not just focusing on insurance. They're hitting all the usual hot-button topics. Nuclear energy, climate change, immigration, law and order, you name it.
They're trying to appeal to as wide an audience as possible, basically. Present themselves as the sensible alternative.
Fair enough. Now let's zoom out a bit and look at Australia's role on the world stage.
Foreign policy. Always an interesting angle, especially in an election year.
We've got AUKUS, the ever-evolving relationship with China, and the whole Pacific region to consider. Where do we even begin?
Well, let's start with AUKUS. That security pact between Australia, the US, and the UK seems to be full steam ahead. Australia just made its first payment towards those nuclear-powered submarines.
$500 million, wasn't it?
Yep, a pretty hefty chunk of change. But that payment was a clear sign that Australia is committed to the deal, even though it's going to be a long and expensive process.
So no backing down on that front. How's it playing out domestically, though? Are there any divisions within the parties about AUKUS?
It seems to have bipartisan support, for the most part, although both sides are trying to spin it to their advantage, of course.
Naturally. Now, what about China? Things seem to have thawed quite a bit after that frosty period we went through.
It's definitely a different vibe now. Trade barriers are coming down, we're talking again, and Australian wine is flowing back into China.
A win for the winemakers, at least.
Definitely a boost for the economy. But it's not all sunshine and roses. There are still some underlying tensions, especially when it comes to things like human rights and China's activities in the South China Sea.
It's a delicate balancing act, isn't it? Trying to maintain a good relationship while also standing up for what we believe in. How's that playing out in the political arena?
Well, you can imagine how it's going. The coalition is accusing Labor of being too cozy with China, while Labor is pointing to the economic benefits of their approach, typical election year maneuvering.
Right. Speaking of delicate situations, there's been some controversy surrounding Australia's dealings with Nauru. What's the story there?
It's about this deal where Australia paid Nauru to take in 3 foreign criminals who had their visas canceled.
Serious crimes.
Yeah, it's basically a relocation program. Instead of these guys staying in Australia, they're sent off to Nauru.
That hasn't gone down well with human rights groups. They're saying it's basically like banishing people and that it could violate their rights.
It's definitely raised some ethical and legal questions. The government says they're acting within the law and prioritizing the safety of Australians. But critics argue it sets a dangerous precedent. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
It's a reminder that these issues of immigration and border security are never simple. All right, let's bring it back home now. There are a few hot-button issues that are dominating the conversation here in Australia, and they're bound to be major factors in the election.
I mean, the cost of living is always front and center, but housing affordability is a close second. It's a crisis, really. Rents are sky high, home prices are through the roof. It's incredibly tough for people to find a place to live.
Especially for young people and those on lower incomes. They're getting priced out of the market.
Exactly. There's been talk about banning foreign buyers from purchasing existing homes. It's a controversial idea, but it shows how desperate the situation is.
It's a big issue, and it's not just about owning a home. Renters are feeling the pinch, too.
Definitely. Rents are rising everywhere.
So what about this ban on foreign buyers? Would it actually work? What are the pros and cons?
Well, those who support the ban say it would ease the pressure on the market and make homes more affordable for Aussies. But those against it say it wouldn't really make much difference to prices and could even scare off foreign investment, which could be bad for the economy. It's a tough one.
No easy solutions there. And then there's climate change and energy. That's been a big focus lately, especially after those devastating bushfires over the summer.
Those fires really brought home the reality of climate change for a lot of people. And it's reignited the debate about how we transition to a cleaner energy future while still keeping the lights on.
The government's pushing for renewables, but the opposition's stance is a bit less clear-cut, isn't it?
Yeah, the coalition says they support the net zero target, but they're not so keen on some of Labor's policies. They say those policies are driving up energy prices and putting our energy security at risk. They want a more balanced approach.
Which basically means keeping fossil fuels in the mix.
At least for now, yeah.
So it's a balancing act between environmental concerns and economic realities. What are the main points of disagreement in this debate? And how might the election outcome affect Australia's energy future?
One of the big sticking points is the speed of the transition. The government wants to move quickly, but the opposition prefers a slower approach. And then there's the role of gas. The government sees it as a temporary fix, a bridge to a renewable future. But the opposition thinks gas should be a key part of our energy mix for the long haul. The election result will definitely have a big impact on our energy policy and our ability to meet our climate goals.
It's a lot to think about. So we've got a close election race, a shaky economic landscape, a constantly shifting world stage, and some major domestic challenges to grapple with. Australian politics is definitely heating up as we get closer to the election.
No doubt about it. It's going to be a wild ride.
And while all that's happening out on the campaign trail back in Canberra, the business of government keeps chugging along. What's the mood like in Parliament these days? I imagine it's pretty tense.
You could say that Parliament's become a bit of a battleground, really, as we get closer to the election. Question time is like this theatrical performance now.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, with the cost of living taking center stage, you've got Labor talking up their economic track record and all the relief measures they put in place, while the coalition is just hammering them on rising prices.
Blaming them for everything.
Basically, they're calling it economic mismanagement, saying Labor's lost control.
Sounds like a preview of the election debates.
Exactly. But it's not all just political point scoring. There's actually work getting done, too. Like that bill to formally establish the new Administrative Review Tribunal we talked about earlier, that's been passed.
That's good news, a step in the right direction for access to justice. What else is making its way through Parliament?
Well, there's a bill to regulate those buy now, pay later services.
Oh, right. Those are getting pretty popular.
Yeah, and there are concerns about people racking up debt. So this bill's about putting some safeguards in place, protect consumers.
So even with the election looming, they're still trying to address some important issues.
It doesn't all just stop because there's an election coming up.
Right. The work goes on. And speaking of important work, what about those parliamentary committees, the ones that keep an eye on things?
Ah, yes, the watchdogs.
They might not always grab the headlines, but they play a crucial role.
They really do. Holding the government accountable, making sure everything's above board.
Any interesting reports or findings from those committees lately?
Actually, yeah, the Committee on Foreign Interference just released a report.
Oh, right. That's been a hot topic.
It is. And they're recommending stricter rules for former ministers who want to take jobs with organizations that have ties to foreign governments.
So trying to prevent any conflicts of interest, or even worse.
Exactly. It's a sensitive issue, and their recommendations are going to spark some debate, for sure.
I can imagine. It's a good reminder that even when we're focused on our own backyard, Australia's international relationships and even the actions of former officials can have a big impact.
Absolutely. And look, with the election just around the corner, we're not likely to see a whole lot of new legislation being introduced. It's all about campaigning now. Both sides are going to be flat out trying to win over voters.
The prayer is on.
Definitely. We've talked about some pretty big challenges facing Australia, the economy, climate change, housing affordability. The decisions Australians make at the ballot box are going to shape how we tackle these issues.
No pressure, voters. Well, there you have it. We've taken a deep dive into the fascinating and often frustrating world of Australian federal politics.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have, from election predictions and campaign tactics to economic trends, key policies, even Australia's place in the world. It's been quite a journey.
It has, and a pleasure discussing it all with you.
Likewise. And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought, helped you make sense of the political landscape, and maybe even sparked some conversations about Australia's future.
Because in the end of the day, it's those conversations that matter.
Absolutely. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What stood out to you as the most crucial factor in this election? Is it the economy, climate change, national security, something else entirely? Let us know what you think. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and stay curious. CAAC28.